very sorry that I don't speak Portuguese. How much wood would a woodchuck chuck if a woodchuck could chuck wood? Did they translate that? So, my name is Zeke. I work at Heroku. I have a background as a designer. I've been doing JavaScript for 12 years now or so. Started early in the days of ActionScript. So I started working at Heroku as a designer and eventually noticed that the Node product at Heroku needed more attention. So I now maintain the Node Buildpack at Heroku. So this presentation is a story about me taking over the Node Buildpack and learning things from our customers, from you. And I wanted to start off by saying, quoting this, the most dangerous thought you can have as a creative person is to think you know what you're doing. Today, here at this conference, you're probably going to hear a lot of people saying things about you should do it this way or you should do things that way. But I think the most important thing for you to do is explore and try new things, and it's the best way to learn. So, Heroku. Heroku is a web company that doesn't suck. That's not what it says on the website, but that's the gist of it. Let me start by asking, how many of you use Heroku? Okay, so maybe half of you. How many of you use Heroku in production? Okay, a smaller number. That's what I was afraid of, but it's okay. So at Heroku, we support all the languages, not just JavaScript. We're a polyglot platform, which means we support lots of different programming languages. The main ones are Ruby, Node, Python, and JVM, like Scala and Clojure and Java and things like that. And we have this stack called Cedar, and it's basically an Ubuntu image that has no built-in support for a specific language. And we use a thing called a Buildpack to add support for a language or framework like Rails or Node.js. So what is a Buildpack? A Buildpack is a collection of scripts that prepare your app for execution on the Heroku platform. It's kind of vague, but that's the gist of it. So we have official build packs, and those are maintained by people within Heroku, and they're all open source. So my job is to maintain the Node build pack, but we have other teams for every different language. So by default, when you're working on a Heroku app and you push to Heroku, we do some introspection into your app to figure out what kind of app it is, what language it's running in. So this graphic, if you can read it, gives you a rough idea of what happens when you push to get it to Heroku. So if your app has a package.json file in it, that's an indicator that it's a Node app. If it has a gem file, it's an indicator that it's a Ruby app. But the cool thing is, if you have set an environment variable in your app called buildpack URL, it means you can override the process that Heroku uses to prepare your app to run on the internet. So there's a lot of really interesting possibilities there if you want to override the default behavior. So how do they work? They're typically written in Bash, which you probably know is a very inhumane and arcane language, even though it's very powerful. It's kind of like JavaScript is here and Bash is here. So probably not very popular among this audience. Not popular for me. I'm learning it against my will, but it has an important role in the web world. So a build pack consists of two scripts. There's a detect script and a compile script, and we'll look at some. It's not actually pseudocode; it's real code. But so a detect script looks like this, and this is bash. So if you're scared of bash, you might want to close your eyes. But the basic idea is we look for an identifier, in this case, package.json. And if the package.json file is there, then we report back, yes, it's a Node.js app. And the exit code of 0 is an indication that the detect script is successful. Otherwise, no, this is not a Node app. And this is the compile script, which is a dramatic simplification of what's actually happening. But essentially what happens is we download the requested version of Node from nodejs.org, add it to your app, and then run npm install with the production flag. So buildpacks are open source, and that was a very intentional decision on the part of Heroku. And I don't know if, for those of you who follow the Node world, there's been some controversy lately about how Node is not going to change very much. Node basically has all of the features that it needs now, and the goal is to stabilize it as much as possible. Some people don't like this idea, and they think that Node should continue to evolve. But the idea that the maintainers of Node have is that Node itself should be very, very small. It should basically be responsible for running, handling I/O. And userland, which essentially is npm, is where all the magic should be happening. So all of you people and me should be writing npm modules. So the benefit there is that we have Node, which is this very small, predictable piece of software, and then we have a giant userland where experimentation reigns supreme. So I'm going to talk specifically about the Node.js Buildpack. So to give you a little background, there were a handful of months where the Node Buildpack was unmaintained and no changes were made, and it was stuck on version 0.4.7 for a long time, and it was very sad. So I got involved, and I took over the project, and I noticed that it has 400, as of yesterday, it has 456 forks, which is the largest open source project that I've ever been responsible for. So what I wanted to know is, what are people doing with all those forks? So it's product management time. I made this slide myself. Yeah. Yeah. Woo! So I should tell you a story. The last time I gave this talk, which was the first time, I mentioned that I like the show Adventure Time, and I thought that there was only one season because I just watch Netflix and I don't know how to use the internet. So I mentioned that, and someone told me after the talk that there are actually 6 or 7 seasons of Adventure Time. So if you're ever giving a talk, I suggest putting some information out there that you're not sure about, and then you're likely to hear some interesting feedback from people. Like, oh, in fact, there are 5 other seasons of Adventure Time. Anyway, so it's just time for me to put on my product management hat and figure out, what are all these people doing? There are almost 500 forks of this build pack. People must be doing something interesting. So you probably all know what product managers are, but they somewhere are situated in the middle. Their job is to figure out what the customers want and take that information and help the designers and the programmers and the engineers figure out what they should be building. But because at Heroku, our customers are developers, they're already building the things that they want. We don't really have to go out and ask customers what they want because they're already doing it, which is like the coolest thing ever. So my first thought was, okay, I'm going to use GitHub. I'm going to go look on the forks page of GitHub and see what people are doing. No. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this screen before, but it's almost impossible to find any useful information in this screen. You have this tiny little window and you sort of move around and try to figure out what all the forks are, and it's a disaster. So again, we can just hack the web. We don't have to wait for GitHub to solve our problems for us. Boom. Yeah. So my first instinct was to use .js to hack the GitHub network activity page. So if you haven't heard of .js, it's this really cool tool. You have a .js directory in your home, and every time you visit a page, if there is a JavaScript file in your .js directory that corresponds to the domain, that script will be evaled against the current page. It's pretty cool. So I don't know if some of you may remember Grease Monkey. Grease Monkey was a Firefox, maybe still exists, but it was and maybe is a Firefox extension that lets people share small scripts for manipulating the web. And .js is essentially the same thing, but the files are on your computer. They're not on the internet. So as soon as you create something, it's only for you. And you could put it in your GitHub profile and upload it to your GitHub account, but there's no real social network or anything like that for sharing your creations. So .js was good for giving me a start, but I really wanted to write a browser extension. So I found this thing called Crosswriter. How many of you have heard of Crosswriter? Okay, this is the same thing that happened at the last talk. Like, nobody's ever heard of Crosswriter, but it's really, really cool. It's really powerful. So what it is I think of Crosswriter as being like Heroku for browser extensions. They take all of the crappy parts out of building a browser extension and they hide them from you. So all you do is focus on building an extension in a workflow that is familiar to you. So here's an example of a Crosswriter browser extension. So if you've ever written an extension before for Chrome or Firefox, there are two scripts. There's the script that can make AJAX requests, and there's the script that can manipulate the DOM. And there's a wall in between them. And so if you want to go get some JSON from some web service and manipulate the DOM, you have to throw the messages over the wall, back and forth, reinventing this sort of silly messaging API. But what Crosswriter does is they abstract that away. So what you're left with is what feels just like writing a normal JavaScript file. So you can access the DOM, and they give you jQuery for free. So if you have a dependency personally on jQuery, you can use it in this context. So I used that to create Forky, which is a browser extension that replaces the network page. So now that I've installed Forky, this is the view that I have now instead of the network view. And essentially all it's doing is looking up using the GitHub API to look up all of the forks of the Node Buildpack and sorting them by popularity. Popularity being a combination of the number of watchers and the number of forks. And watchers, I guess, are stargazers, maybe? So I started using Crosswriter and I got really excited. So I was like, okay, I'm going to make another one. I want to introspect NPM dependencies when I'm looking at a GitHub repo. So now I have this NPM viewer, so whenever I'm on GitHub and I look at a repo that has a package.json in it, it'll automatically list out the dependencies of that package. So it's really cool. Like, this is the one for Express, which is a popular Node module. So it's a great way to figure out what the cool kids are doing. So I can scroll to the bottom of the page here and see what TJ Holloway Chuck is using, which gives me a pretty good idea of whether I can be confident in using these modules. But anyway, I'm getting off topic. Let's get back to the product management stuff. So I have this 4-key tool, and it kind of gives me an idea of what's useful or what's getting popular on GitHub. But just because there's a fork of something doesn't mean that it's actually being used on the platform. It just means that somebody forked it, and maybe it got posted on Hacker News and a bunch of people started it. So it's not real data. So I figured I better start looking in the deploy data for Heroku. So whenever you push an app to Heroku, the buildpack URL, like the app metadata, is stored in a column in a Postgres database. And HStore is a relatively new feature in Postgres that allows you to store arbitrary key value information in your in a table. So it's kind of like the NoSQL world meets the SQL world. So if you want some of the stability of using a stability or familiarity of using a SQL database, but you also want to be able to sort of store information ad hoc, then HStore is a pretty good answer for that. So here's a SQL query that I use to just fetch the buildpack URLs from the deploy data and figure out which buildpacks are popular. So I observed some trends in the process of digging through that data. So by far, the most popular third-party Node Buildpack is the Grunt Buildpack. And we've had some people talking about Grunt and Bower already today, and they're obviously massively popular tools. So what this means is someone has taken the default Node Buildpack and added a step that runs Grunt Heroku. So if you want to compile your assets on Heroku instead of on your development machine, you have that option. Hem, I think, is another build tool that's specific to Spine.js. People are also using the forks of the Node Buildpack to run headless browsers. So a popular use case is people are creating apps that do screenshots as a service. And in fact, I think I've heard of some companies who are using screenshot diffs as like an integration testing tool. So they'll run a build, and then they'll use Phantom.js or Casper to figure out whether or not the web page looks visually the same way it did on the last build. And if it's changed, that's an indication that there's some kind of regression. It's pretty cool. There's a ton of Meteor development going on. There's like lots and lots of different flavors of Meteor build packs. I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing. I mean, I feel like maybe there should be one Meteor build pack, but it's an indication that Meteor is very popular right now. People are also using forks of the build pack for managing binary dependencies. So Cairo is an image processing library that is depended on by Node Canvas. And Node Canvas is this incredible tool that lets you do Canvas stuff in Node. So I don't have a demo of it here, but if you guys have heard of the JavaScript library called Color Thief, it's a front-end tool that will process an image and tell you the most common colors in that image, and you can do some really cool things with it. So I used Node Canvas to create a web service. Given an image, it'll give you back a JSON blob that tells you what colors are used in that image. So you could use that to like profile images for search engine tools and all kinds of things like that. And then some of these other things are like taglib is used, I think, for extracting image or extracting metadata from MP3 files and stuff like that. So you can basically run anything on Heroku, and these build packs are proof that people are kind of figuring that out. Of course, you could say that Heroku should be making it more obvious for people that you can run anything, but that's another talk. People are doing some crazy stuff too, like there's a Dart build pack, there's a null build pack. By the way, this is a website. This is what I'm showing you now. So if you want to follow along, this should work in your mobile phone or in your browser. So there's tons and tons of links in here, lots of useful stuff. So other things we're seeing are people running multiple apps that have a Node dependency and a Ruby dependency in common. So there's a little bit of promiscuity there. I think we're going to hear from someone else about API sex maybe this afternoon or tomorrow. So if you're into promiscuity, you're going to get more of it. Composability, this is another thing that's like perfect for a whole other talk, but the idea here is that with these build packs, you can run multiple build packs against your app. So if you want to use the default Node build pack, but you want to also do something else to your app beforehand, you can chain them together. And composability is a concept that dates way back from Unix world. But it's basically, if you think of a pipe, was that me? A pipe in Unix is the simplest example of composability. You have one program that prints to standard out, and you pipe it to the next program, which accepts input on standard in. And the same idea applies to the multi-build packs. Really powerful stuff. So a little bit about the future. There are over 1,500 third-party build packs in use on Heroku today, which is pretty cool. There's a lot of really cool stuff going on. So my job is going to be to help surface this information to people and sort of be a steward for the community and help people figure out which build packs they should be using. And then also taking cues from these build packs and incorporating them into the default build pack. So if you're not even interested in any of this build pack stuff, it's still going to benefit you as a Heroku user. So I'm currently in the process of stripping down the behavior of the Node build pack so that it's a significantly smaller piece of software. And if any of you are interested in trying it out, come talk to me after and I'll point you to the branch. It's also nice because it lets you run edge versions of Node. So if you want to run like 0.11 on Heroku, this lets you do it. So see me after. And then the plan is to make composable build packs the default on Heroku. So if you don't want to use the behavior, you don't have to, but if you want to, it'll just automatically be there. And as of recently, Node was declared a first-class citizen at Heroku. So now we have a little bit more power to turn it into something big. And that's mostly been because of the users. The growth of Node on Heroku has been tremendous, and as you all probably know, the Node ecosystem grows by double every few months. So all we had to do was look at the data, and we realized that this should be a priority, and it will be moving forward. So that's it. One thing I wanted to add is the source of this app is on GitHub, and I used some unconventional techniques to put it together. So if you're interested in learning how to write a static front-end application using Node modules, this repository could be useful for you. So it's worth looking at. Any questions? Mike.
Hello, hello.
Hi.
Do you have any stats on the adoption of Node.js as a language?
It depends on what number you're looking at, but it's the second most popular language on Heroku, behind Ruby. We don't give out specific numbers about
Okay,
revenue or number of deploys or anything like that, but I will say that there are thousands of Node apps being deployed every hour.
And is there any way to know which of those are more people just playing around and getting to know the language rather than putting production application?
Yeah. So to give you a general idea from what we've seen so far, it is mostly people doing experimental stuff, and the number of production apps on Heroku is not that high. But we want to change that.
Cool.
So it's definitely a priority to change that.
Thanks.
One thing that I do want to say is I think we probably have, Heroku probably has more information about what Node apps are doing and what dependencies they're using than any other platform. Maybe. I don't know. I mean, if you could call AWS a platform, but I don't think they're aggregating that kind of information. So what we hope to do in the future is help NPM users identify vulnerabilities or incompatibilities between libraries just by looking at the aggregate. Other questions? Back here.
Hi. I have two questions.
Okay.
The first one is you talked about all the teams and languages and technologies you provide in Heroku, and you told about Ubuntu basic distribution you use to run those buildpacks. The buildpacks are open source. Is this distro available too for users or
the distro?
Yes.
It's not. That's part of the sort of secret sauce. But I would say that we are definitely, anytime we have an opportunity to make something open source safely, we do it because it's better for us and for the community. So for some of the people that are interested in low-level stuff, there's something called Docker, which is like a Linux container software that's come out recently, and we have our eyes on that. It could actually become part of the Heroku stack. Don't quote me on that, but it would be an interesting way for us to leverage some of the open source contributions at that level.
Okay, because at my work we have this problem when we use cloud services, because they just provide their own distribution, like Amazon AMI. They have updates every day, so we had to build our own based on centralized. But okay, the second one is you're addressing Node directly on Heroku with lots of applications every day being deployed. I notice using Node that when we need to go further on the file system or memory access that starts to grow beyond the half gigabyte barrier, Node, it starts to slow at a point that it simply stops or dies or goes to an end. Did you in Heroku have something that addressed this kind of problem, or it was solved on Node recently?
Yeah, so one potential solution to your problem would be to use 2x dynos. They're relatively recent. It's basically just a dyno with twice the memory and twice the CPU. That's kind of a simplification of it, but you can run 2x dynos and they're exactly twice the price. We also have 4x dynos coming soon. But for a Node app, if you're seeing that kind of memory consumption, it's probably an indication, normally, I don't want to make assumptions about your app, but normally it's an indication that there's some kind of memory leak or something wrong with your application. So that would be one thing to do, is try and debug that. Lastly, decoupling your app as much as you can is a great way to solve those problems, to isolate independent pieces of the app and host them separately as a sort of conglomeration of services.
Yes, we use it, we separate in various different daemons and using ZeroMQ or ActiveMQ to communicate and solve the problem.
Yeah.
But it's in the start it was very let's say a headache.
Yeah.
Because we just worked with big files, which is receiving the uploads from big files, and it just kaboom in the middle of nothing. So
one final solution to that might be, are you using streams?
yes.
You are, okay. I guess that's not the answer then. Talk to me after. We can elaborate on it. Other questions?
Thanks.
No? Okay. Thanks a lot, guys.